Hello and welcome to our Gem Pursuit. My name is Matthew Weldon and I'm joined in our magical and mysterious pursuit to the world of antique and vintage jewellery by my trusty co-host Alyce Ketcher. Alyce, welcome back.
I'm back, everybody. I hope you missed me.
We all missed you immensely. In our last episode, we took you through the incredible jewellery collection at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs. And this week, we've got another antique lover's guide to one of the world's most famous museums. Alyce, would you like to tell the listeners where we are taking them today?
We're off to the Louvre in Paris.
Très bien, on va commencer.
So, Matthew, the Louvre. I think it's really important that when we do these museum episodes that we kind of give people a little bit of history behind the actual museum, just because a lot of these museums are housed in what could also be a part of the collection itself. And in particular with the Louvre, we're looking at what once used to be a royal palace.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's one of those buildings that you can't help but see it in Paris. And then obviously it's a museum today, but it did have a longer history where it was, they said, a royal palace. Actually dates back. It was built at the end of the 11th century, start of the 12th century. And that blows my mind because it's, 800 years ago. And it looks incredibly contemporary for that time period.
It does indeed. I mean, obviously a lot of refurbishment and additions have been added onto it, but to kind of give people context of how long ago that was, the 8th century to the 12th century is, you know, the time that the Vikings were roaming the seas, you know, seafaring people. So it kind of brings into context how old and how historic this particular place is and how important it is, of course, not only to history, but to the French people.
Yeah, those type of analogies are pretty interesting. I saw one recently when they said that Cleopatra lived closer to the woolly mammoths than the iPhone, which is a pretty interesting analogy. But yeah, when you put it in context, like the Vikings, that sounds almost like ancient history. Like It's almost, you know, pre-records or pre-modern history, but actually it is the same time that the Louvre was built. And I said the 11th to 12th. I always say that when I see a year like 1190, I always say the 11th century, but it's the 12th century.
Yeah, 12th to 13th.
12th to 13th.
It's kind of around then. But Philip II was the one who commissioned for it to be built. And if you actually go to the bottom of the Louvre, because this particular time period is considered medieval, you can still see the medieval remnants of the Louvre down there. So what we see today is more of, you know, an extension on top of what was originally built. And really a lot of that had to do with King Louis XIV. He, in the 1600s, late 1600s, also added a few additional pieces to the Louvre himself after a fire that happened in 1661.
Yes. And even prior to Louis, it was Charles V in the 14th century. He made it into the luxurious palace that Louis then added onto significantly. Yes. So, I mean, yeah, it was a castle basically to defend, you know.
It really, so like to put it into context, if you've never been to Paris before, Matthew, like how would you explain the kind of expanse that this building is, or even I would say set of buildings and underground tunnels and basements and attics that make up what is the Louvre Palace?
Well, how would I describe it? It's almost like it's its own little mini city within a city. When you are in the grounds of the Louvre, you are actually completely surrounded by the building. So when you walk through, there's an archway that you go, well, it depends what side of it you come into, but we from where we came in through the archway and you step into the courtyard and then it just completely encompasses you. And what I always think of when I'm there, I walk around Dublin and I think, oh yeah, we've got some nice big old buildings. And then you see the Louvre and you're like, whoa, okay, now that is a different old empire state that had, massive wealth.
It's another level, and it also kind of helps you to understand a little bit more about the French Revolution, I think, because it would almost take you outside of what's happening in the real world when you're inside the palace gates. I mean, there's a number of courtyards. There's extensive gardens that lead all the way up to the Arc de Triomphe. And it is decadent. It is inside. It is so, the expense is so much, you get lost inside the buildings. I mean, we went to the Louvre recently as a team, a Courtville team, and we did over 20,000 steps inside the Louvre alone. And we got lost numerous times trying to find certain artifacts that we were trying to track down. So one thing that I would say to you is like, yes, there are certain things inside the Louvre that you definitely want to see, but it is something that you need to be aware of. It is a walking person's dream, but you're going to have really comfortable shoes on to go through this one.
Yeah, and also time-wise, it's going to be at least a day, really depend. We spent almost the whole day and we skipped loads. I mean, we looked for the Oceania display and
we missed out on heaps. But there's things. I mean, if you are going there with a certain thing in mind, you make your way through to find that one thing. But just to finish off the history of the Louvre, how did it become a museum? Well, we touched on there the French Revolution. The French Revolution saw the French royal family completely destroyed and taken off the throne, and all of their assets, including their palaces and everything, their collections inside, were turned over to the French people. Now, the Louvre itself, the National Assembly decreed that the Louvre Palace should be used as a museum. And I think that was a wonderful way to preserve a part of their history and also open it up to the French people so that they can actually see what their money actually created, because before this, they didn't have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, that was a lot of foresight in that, to open it up to the public and preserve it, although they didn't preserve the jewellery part of it very well, which we'll get to. But it is preserved perfectly. And it was in 1793, during the French Revolution, that it was officially opened as that public museum. So that's gone back 31 years now. Yeah, mental arithmetic still going well, but
it wasn't always open. So, like you said, 1793, the people said, the National Assembly said, okay, this is going to be a museum. It already housed the royal collection, and when King Louis the XIV moved him and his family to Versailles and decided, that it wasn't going to be his primary residence anymore, he left the royal collection there, the majority of the royal collection. So it was already there. It was already a good idea to have it as a museum. It meant that they were able to basically just open it up there and then how it was, because it was already housing the collection. However, they noticed in 1796 that actually we've got problems, like the royal families, the structural integrity of the building and the way in which it currently was needed help. So they closed the Louvre down because of those structural problems. And then in 1801, after they had kind of dealt with those problems, reopened it again. And then from there till now, it's been open as a museum and gained such an extensive amount of pieces that it can only be explained as awesome.
And the key other aspect you'll notice in the Louvre is a final renovation, which makes it quite distinctive today, that happened in the 1980s and 1990s, which included the iconic glass pyramid entrance, which is the one that we all get a selfie on, and when you're there, when you arrive at the Louvre, my actual abiding memory of going there, I've been there once or twice, and the time we went recently, it's just so many people and from all over the world trying to get a photo. And it's exactly that, a glass pyramid. And when you go into the Louvre, it's like a mirror image of it going the other way. So that really is the modern twist to this ancient building. And just make sure you book tickets.
So also with the Louvre, we have to talk about what's inside of it, because we need a breakdown of what's going on inside this incredibly large and walkable but sore legs afterwards building.
Well, how are we going to break down these 33,000 artworks that are contained in this enormous building?
But that's only the art, Matthew. If you look at the full Louvre collection, it's over 600,000 pieces.
Well, I don't know how we're going to tackle the 33,000, but 600,000, yeah. I mean that's why it's over 782,000 square feet, or 72,700 square meters, if your metric system. So how did they break down these 600,000 pieces?
So they've divided it amongst curated collections really cleverly, and they've kind of broken it into wings of the building, which it makes the whole place like a massive maze, because there's no real starting point and there's no real finishing point. So
do you know what? It actually reminds me of Power Score Townhouse in a way.
In a very small part of the room.
No,
that's inside the Louvre.
In this way, it does remind me. Yeah, I know. We're grasping here. We're grasping. But it reminds me in the sense that it was never built to be a museum. So the layout, if you were to design a museum from scratch, it would definitely not be in this format. And Power Score Townhouse, while it's a beautiful shopping centre, it is definitely not designed to be a shopping centre.
No. So it's not designed for things to be easy to find, right? So you really have to, a little top tip for everybody is you need a map. Unless you have been there many, many times, at the beginning when you walk down through that pyramid into the open area, find yourself a map or look online, because they do have little maps that you can use online to actually find your way through it. But let me tell you about the curated collections. Okay, so it's broken down into eight collections or eight curated areas. They are Egyptian antiquities, Near Eastern antiquities, Greek, Etruscan and Roman antiquities, Islamic art, sculpture, and lastly, decorative arts, paintings, prints, and drawings. So 8 sections that fit into this museum, and all of them have something incredible to offer.
Yeah, and it's divided over, I'm just looking at the online interactive map, which is a really good place to plan your journey. It's over 4 floors, and I would definitely consider making a serious plan before you go of what you want to see, if you want to see it all.
Yes, also because it says floors, but what we found when we went into there was that there were also mezzanines within floors, and you don't know whether the mezzanine is the next floor or part of the first floor.
Yes.
So it can become really confusing. And then you also have artwork pieces that are on staircases, so you don't know whether that staircase is considered the next level or the level below. So it can be really confusing. And if you have set out to see one of the masterpieces inside this particular museum, you really don't want to miss it. So really take the time out to just make almost like a little track for yourself of where you want to go, and then maybe you'll see other things on the way to the masterpieces that you want to see. which we did. That's what we did. But it will mean that you don't miss out because it's very, very easy to make a wrong turn in the Louvre and find yourself in Islamic art instead of the Egyptian halls.
I remember we were looking for the Oceania display, and I think we got pretty close to it, but I think we needed to eat something, actually.
But yeah, we were at the end of our tether. Now, it also is worth mentioning before we move on to the next section, which is going to be about masterpieces inside the Louvre, is that the Louvre is actually the largest museum in the world. So this is the museum that does house such an amazing collection of pieces. The actual palace itself, I would consider a piece in itself. You know, even if you removed all of the artwork that is inside of it, all of the sculptures and the beautiful antiquities and the objects and everything from it, the palace itself would still be a destination to see in itself. So it's, you know, the space is amazing, perfect for a museum, but it's also considered not only the largest museum, but has the largest amount of items on display.
Out of all the masterpieces that are there, and there's quite a few masterpieces, so let's just pick one highlight. We were there a few weeks ago. What was your highlight masterpiece that you saw when you were there?
Well, I mean, my highlight is always going to be jewellery, but I know Matthew's rolling his eyes at me, but I decided that I would go for the most famous piece inside the whole of the Louvre, which brings millions of people to the Louvre every year and is kind of like crazy to me that this particular piece of artwork is so well known over all of the cultures, countries, ethnicities of the world. This particular piece of art is actually the most famous artwork of all time. And it is the famous Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci.
It's got like even that the name, it has its own aura about it. Really, like I don't think it is up there with Jesus is one of the most known names in the world. I'd say.
Yes, I definitely say
globally.
I definitely say so. And this particular piece, I was actually confounded when I looked at. I'm not an art dealer, right? I deal in antiques. I do deal in beautiful items. But what I see when I see the Mona Lisa, number one, if you're going to the Louvre to see the Mona Lisa, make sure that you understand that you are one of hundreds and hundreds of people that day who is going to see it. Because when we walked into that room to see the Mona Lisa, she was smiling at everybody. Her smile was not just for us, right? There was literally hundreds of people in front of this particular
just a
painting.
sea of extendable phone holders, like just so many of them, and just all these phones like holding up like us.
Yeah, you will not be alone with her. But I was just like, what I wanted to understand and what I want the listeners to understand is, why is it such a famous piece of art? Why does everybody know about it? And out of all of the artwork pieces in the Louvre or in the world, why is it considered so alluring? So I've got a few things on here for the people who want to understand as well. It was created in the 16th century by Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci, when he created his pieces...
He's pretty well known as well, actually, isn't he?
Yeah. When he created most of his pieces he sold off, right? He made artwork and the artwork was sold. This was the only piece that he actually kept for himself. He never sold it. It was with him till the day that he died. And then when he died, a French king purchased the piece. Okay, so number one, even the artist who was extremely skilled, Italian artist, very well-known artist, kept this piece with him. So it had a special meaning to him. Number two, her expression on her face. It's considered, is she smiling? Is she smirking? Is she's staring at you from all sides of the room? And this was one of the first paintings in history that was actually able to create almost like a human-like expression in a still picture. Okay, so this is why it was so alluring. How did it become so famous? Well, number one, I'd say a French king purchasing it would have added to its allure. The fact that Leonardo da Vinci didn't want to be parted from it until he died would have also added to its allure. But what really made it famous was in 1911, Vincenzo Peruglia stole the Mona Lisa. And he stole the Mona Lisa because he believed that the Mona Lisa should be an Italian museum, an Italian artist, Italian piece of art, an Italian noble family. This particular piece should be in Italy. And so he stole the piece, and then in 1914 it was recovered. But it was one of the most famous art stealings or heists in the world at the time.
Like it disappeared for 28 months. That's pretty incredible. I always find, Robin, the heist of a painting is quite interesting because
how do you hide something so well known?
So well known.
It's like stealing a person.
Do you roll it up or just like, how do you walk out? It's like carrying a big TV. Like how do you actually get out? But it's so well known, and that's how they got it back. Like, 'cause he tried to sell it.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of understand why he would feel that way, and I think about the Irish crown jewels, which are missing, and if they were, somewhere else other than Ireland and were found to be somewhere else other than Ireland, I'm sure that there would be someone who is an Irish national who would go in and steal those jewels back because they belong in Ireland.
Albeit the Mona Lisa was sold originally out of Italy.
Yeah, no, correct. Correct. It wasn't stolen from the Italian people. It was purchased by a French king. But I understand
the motivation.
The motivation behind it.
Their view would be its true home.
Yeah, and also it has been on display in the museum since the museum's opening. Like it has been there forever. And so she is the main event that people go to the Louvre for. Like, imagine that painting has been there for over 230 years and probably longer than that. So it's important piece that I think is homed in the right place.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in the room that it's in the Louvre as well, it's, as you said, like that room itself, it'd be worth visiting. That was the room the French crown jewels were auctioned. Like, it has amazing history in itself. You'll definitely want to allocate some time in that room to get to the front.
So that you can actually swim through the people, so you can get her little smile for yourself. And also, have the feeling of actually seeing the real life effect that the painting has, because you can't get that off of a print.
No.
But lastly, for my masterpiece, Matthew, is I want to know if you know how much the Mona Lisa is worth. What value would you put?
Today?
Yes. It was valued in 1962, but I've taken the value of it in 1962 and made it to see what it was for 2023.
So you've taken the number and upped it in terms of
Well, I've used a like a.
That's the reason I'm asking is I'm trying to figure out what I think it would be worth.
Yes.
In that it's well, I mean, look, an art piece like this is priceless, Alyce.
No. It's known as the highest valued piece of artwork of all time.
Okay, so you hear of pieces selling for hundreds of millions in sales around the world these days. So they're not the Mona Lisa. So it's definitely got to be, it's got to be in the billions, I'd say. It's probably like, I would say it's, I want to say 10 billion, but maybe it's
okay, that's a little bit of a stretch.
But I think that's going to be too high. So I'm going to say like 2.5 billion.
Okay. So in 1962, the Mona Lisa was valued at $100 million. That projected to today means that the Mona Lisa is currently worth $1 billion US.
Yeah. But I mean, it like definitely is like they but if you want to, they wouldn't sell it for that.
No. Yeah. I mean, like what you're saying, like 2 billion, or 2.5 billion. If the Louvre was looking to sell it for that, they probably still wouldn't. We're talking about, new replacement value is 1 billion.
Well, I don't think your local insurers are going to do it, but
no, but it is currently insured for that particular price.
They probably haven't insured for that. Yeah, that's in.
So it's the highest piece of insured artwork in the whole world. It's that important to human history. Let's see if you can top that one, Matthew. What's your masterpiece?
Can I top the Mona Lisa as a masterpiece? I know you like to challenge me, Alyce, but I don't know if I can meet this particular one. Well, I don't know. Let's have a look now. See. But all right, Ozzy. All right. I'll tell you what. There's a couple of really famous ones in the Louvre. In the Louvre.
Oh my gosh. The way that the one time we were in Paris and he goes, we're going to go to the Louvre. I was like, what's the Louvre?
In classic Irish wit, in Dublin, the accent of Dublin, they emphasize it like an O, like an oeuvre. But
the Louvre.
But there was, and they also like to give buildings names like what they look like, So there was a new National Convention Centre that opened that looked like a vacuum cleaner, and obviously the only vacuum cleaner in Ireland we all had was a Hoover. But this particular building got built and it looks like a Hoover, and everyone calls it the Hoover.
The Hoover.
The Hoover, yeah. But it's actually a very nice convention centre, and there's lots of very like international conventions.
Anyway,
there, so.
Back to your masterpiece, Matthew.
Well, I'm going to say one that I think is an underrated masterpiece, which I don't think is... So I have one that we're going to know, right, which is really nice for reasons for us to get into. But an underrated one that I thought was pretty cool was Georges Latour, The Cheat with the Ace of Diamonds, which I thought was a really cool painting because it's a game of cards, right? But if you look at the four people in the game of cards, what I love, it's hard to say who's on whose side, right? Because there's one person who's clearly cheating, right? There's another person who seems to be like very much puzzled, like they're trying to figure out what their next move is. And then there's two ladies in the middle who kind of are giving each other side eye, and it's not clear. It's really, and I looked at the start, I was like, oh, they're definitely working with the person with the ace behind their back. But the more every time I look at it, it seems like there's a different situation going on. It's like a really dark background, but the people are really bright. So it's quite striking.
And who is the artist of this piece, Matthew?
Georges de Latour was the artist, and it's just a perfect, like, suspended in motion, like the action is suspended in motion.
I thought you were going to say it was Kenny Rogers. Know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em.
It couldn't be. It's from 1625, so
17th century piece of artwork. I don't think Kenny was around then, even though we love you, Kenny Rogers. I
don't claim to be an art. This is just what I liked when I was there. I don't claim to be an art, buff or anything like that. But apparently it's reminiscent of a Caravaggio. Caravaggio.
I'm like Caravaggio. The thing is that what I love about museums is you go there for a specific piece or a specific art piece that you're looking for. And you leave having been actually inspired by something outside of what you originally thought you were going there for.
Yes. I remember we were there with Darcy and she liked this really dark, small portrait of a man's kind of torso and fed. She loved it was a piece that had John the Baptist's head on a plate. Remember, it was John the Baptist's head on a plate after he had been killed. But it was only that size.
Yeah, it was literally smaller than a head, but the shadows and the darkness and the expression on the face and the finish of the piece of art was stunning and definitely emotive. And that's what's really important to remember about museums, is that you don't rush through a museum to try and find the one piece that everybody wants to go and see.
Which is probably the Mona Lisa.
Yes. Yeah. But you take your time to enjoy what is emotive to you throughout the museum. And that's important to kind of remember as well.
That's really good tips. I was very lucky to go with Alyce, who had researched loads of and knows a lot about it anyway, and also Darcy, who has an artistic background. And you know, that's why I would also we didn't do a tour, but I actually think that would be worth considering. It would probably bring the pieces to life for you. But anyway, that was just as an aside. The masterpiece that struck me as well, and probably, well, for two reasons. Number one, because of its sheer scale. And number two, because of the jewellery in the photos, was the Coronation of Napoleon portrait.
Oh my gosh, I love this. And you don't actually understand the magnitude of this piece of, it blows my mind because it's also perspective. When you look at such a large piece of artwork, you think, how on earth did the artist get everybody at the right proportion so it doesn't look like somebody is miniature or
yes.
Do you know what I mean? When it's so large, because remember when you were a kid, right? You're at school and you had to rule down the page. And if you had a ruler that was like a wooden ruler and you couldn't see through the ruler, you wouldn't do a straight line, right? If you were on a blank page, because your perspective is kind of a bit off. And I was just like, as a kid, I can't even rule a straight line, let alone create a piece of art, which is human size, actually larger than human size, would fill a whole wall with 12-foot ceilings.
You need a bit more than 12 feet ceilings. It's 6.21 meters high, which is 20 feet high.
So, just imagine
32 feet wide.
Imagine the detail that you're doing on this to the very tiniest degree of detail. We can see the rings that people are wearing in this particular piece. It is absolutely spectacular.
And that level of detail, and I think that, as you said, how the people all look in proportion, because there's people in the foreground and the background, and you can tell obviously exactly where they are, but they all look just perfect. But I mean, this painting for me was the scale of it. Number one, the detail. Number two, the jewellery in it. Napoleon was responsible for getting a lot of additional jewellery into the French royal jewels, which we will come to in our next episode. But the pieces in it are amazing. All the tiaras that are being worn, the crown that was about to be placed on Napoleon's head in this particular one, you can then see very soon after, which I think is pretty cool. So,
well, as art historians ourselves, in terms of wearability of jewels, most of the time we have to rely on these paintings to know how jewellery was worn. There's certain things like stomachers and hair clips and also jewels that were actually embroidered or sewn onto garments. We rely on images like this to show us how imaginative these particular people were in creating an overall styled look. And it's really easy to see why royalty in these times were considered heavenly or associated with God, because they look like angels from heaven with the amount of jewels that they have on them.
Yes.
And we don't even get to see the scintillation. So imagine them walking through added with that scintillation of the stones that they're wearing. It would have been a spectacle
Otherworldly.
to witness. Yeah.
And of course, we couldn't finish this episode about the Louvre without mentioning, I mean, the main reason we went. Of course, there was 600,000 artifacts there, but the main reason that we went as a team was to visit the Galerie d'Apollon, which is, of course, where the French crown jewels is housed, and it is a spectacular collection.
I cannot express the amount of adoration and like giddiness that I feel walking into this room. Number one, many people come to Paris and they realize that they want to go to Versailles to see the Palace of Versailles. They want to go to the Hall of Mirrors inside the Palace of Versailles. Well, save your ticket and go to the Louvre and go to the
Apollon. The
Apollon Gallery.
Let's get a good run at it there. Galerie d'Apollon.
There you go. Matthew's better at French than I am. Because this particular hallway, it's like a long hall room, was actually created by the same person who created the Hall of Mirrors. So we have touches of what was going on in the Palace of Versailles in this particular hall or room. And what I would say to you is, if we removed the crown jewels, if we removed the full collection on the inside of it, the actual sumptuousness of this room would be more than enough to kind of whet your appetite for all things beautiful. Firstly, it has these beautiful high ceilings. They're completely covered and decorated with paintings of Apollo, the sun god, driving his chariot across the sky. Everything inside the room that has to do with the ceilings and the portraiture going all the way down the room has to do with how the sun actually blesses the world, or what comes from the sun. So we have hours, days, months, seasons, the signs of the zodiac and the continents all displayed over the ceiling of this particular gallery. It is divine, absolutely beautiful.
And of course, the sun is such a key element because, Louis XIV was the Sun King and he identified with Apollo. I think it was said Apollo slays the python is what was wrote across the ceiling.
It's the central pendant. So the central pendant of the whole ceiling is a fresco, which is created of Apollo, the famous story of Apollo slaying the python. This is kind of like the centerpiece, and then surrounding it is everything else to do with the sun.
Yeah, it's a perfect room
to house
the crown jewels. And as you said, actually, if you didn't have anything in there, you could have another gallery for the crown jewels because it's such an impressive room in its own right. But being a shopkeeper, I also really appreciated the display cases that I think the jewels were in. I think they were pretty impressive. They were actually made in 1887 by Edmond Guillaume, and they're all monogrammed RF, which is République Française. These crown jewels were on display for the people, the Republic of France, even though they sold a lot of them, which we'll talk about in our next episode about the crown jewels when we dive into detail.
Somebody's very excited about our episode.
Yeah. Well, there's a wedding dress shop next to us, so it could be that, could be the wedding. But yeah, they're beautiful cases that house them. There's been a couple of later cases that have been made. As the collection's grown, they've had to obviously introduce other cases. And obviously they have to be secure because, like, as we talked about in the Mona Lisa, there was a robbery there in 1911. In 1976, there was the sword of Charles X was stolen out of the Louvre. So it is always a target. So these have to be functional cases as well as...
what I would say to you is, like, it took us forever to find the gallery. Right. It wasn't easy.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy to find. They don't make it easy to find. They say, oh, look, the gallery is this way. And then it points an arrow to basically a wall. And you're like, what does that mean? So it's very confusing.
There wasn't a sign for it.
They had a sign for it like at the beginning and then never again. It was like
a statue of Apollo outside it.
It was really crazy. But one thing that I would say, like you said, it sets the scene, right? So we have the visuals in this gallery, which are all encompassing. They show the reach of the sun and the magnifying glory of the Sun King or Apollo, which he kind of like tries to tie elegantly to himself, Louis XIV. We've got these incredibly perfectly curated cabinets which have been created to house something special. And then what is actually inside the cabinets does not disappoint. This is the reason why we went to the Louvre, and our eyes could not be peeled from the pieces inside.
Yeah, the pieces inside, well, they don't disappoint. Far from disappoint. I think you could take any number of them. I mean, they're at the moment, there is 105 pieces on display in the Apollo Gallery. So, I mean, any one of those are pretty impressive, like, you know, and so many impressive stones, diamonds. There's an amazing collection of obviously the royal jewels. There's hard stone vases carved out of all types.
That's the one thing that I think is probably overlooked the most. You'll see as you walk into the gallery, people will walk in and there'll be a long cabinet, and the long cabinet has hard stone vessels on the inside of it. Now, King Louis the 14th, he was obsessed with hard stones, right? Obsessed. So people just overlook that. They're kind of like, oh yeah, cool. And then run to the diamonds, right? Because there's an extensive amount of diamonds and emeralds and sapphires, and people are like hawks. Magpies are like, meow. I'm not saying that I'm not as well, but I was intrigued by these vessels. His personal collection actually had over 800 of these vessels, and they were created in carved from a number of gemstones, which include agate, amethyst, lapis lazuli, jade, and rock crystal. And some of the most beautiful are on display. One in particular, which is my favorite, was Neptune's cup. If you go in and see it, this is carved out of lapis lazuli, and it's the details on it. And I understand why he had such a love for these pieces, because one thing about hard stones is they're created by nature. They have a specific color and pattern to them, and they're never replicated again. So that color pattern, the way that the speckles are throughout the stone, the overall hue and depth and variety of that hard stone is a one-off. And that will always forever be appealing to the human eye.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at that Neptune's cup, really incredible piece. I suppose it's easy to go past some of these vases because that there is so many in this one collection that, you know, you can kind of skip by because, okay, I saw that one, and then you kind of skip by the next one because although it doesn't look similar, right? It could be agate, it could be jasper, it could be jade, it could be lapis lazuli. So, but that's what I am. Like there was only one Regency diamond.
Yes.
So...
which we will go into some of the diamonds in next week's episode, which is going to be talking about the French crown jewels. So we won't go too deeply into what we viewed there. But there's a number of other pieces that we actually saw there as well, which was also a very famous spinel, which Matthew talked about in our previous episode on spinel. Remember that one, Matthew?
I do remember it, yeah. I remember it well. The spinel Côte de Bretagne, which of course was at the time that that spinel came about Bretagne, was not actually part of France, which is interesting. But, and the collection there has grown. Only and as you said, we won't dive into the French crown jewels because that is definitely going to take a whole episode.
Yeah.
And it only started off with 8 pieces in the French crown jewels because they're all sold. But yeah, no, I think the collection there of like some of the ancient pieces are also really like quite incredible. The Napoleon era pieces as well. So, I mean, I couldn't pick one, I think, because I was probably so confuddled by the jewellery that was there. But a serious, impressive collection. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. Remember, we have notes on what we spoke about with links and anything else you might need in the description area of this podcast. And if you haven't already made sure you hit that follow button, please do it now. My thanks to my trusty co-host, Alyce Ketcher. Thanks, Alyce.
Thanks, everyone. Good to be back.
And our podcast producer, dustpod.io. We'll be back with another magical and mysterious pursuit through the world of antique jewellery very soon. Until the next time, from me, Matthew Weldon, chat you then.